We'll talk some sports here while you think about
We'll
that.
do a sports show over here. You can fill us in.
All right, let's we'll save the
roaches.
It's
You
always,
don't want to be a roach.
Anytime somebody says to me, "Do you want the good news or bad news?" I always take the bad news first. Just get it out of the way.
Bees, Steve.
You can report back at the end of the segment. This is not the end of the segment. We're just getting started here.
Okay.
So let's start with the negative, because then we'll save the good stuff to talk about.
I like that approach. Yeah.
So the women's basketball team, game against Virginia yesterday, they're having much the same season the men are, in a spot where they're at home against a team you felt like, they could beat. They probably should have won that game, up by double digits in the fourth quarter. What happened yesterday down the stretch?
Yeah, they just didn't really execute in the fourth quarter. I mean, Georgia Woolley had a couple costly turnovers late. I was very complimentary of the way she was playing in the first half. I thought she was hustling everywhere, and the stat sheet almost wasn't doing it justice for how valuable she was. But just some bad execution on the set plays offensively in the fourth quarter, and they got their chances. They missed every three they took in the fourth quarter. I think they were 0 for 8 from three-point range. So just didn't make enough winning plays down the stretch, really. And Virginia got some momentum, a couple bad turnovers. So it's frustrating because it felt like the fourth quarter against Clemson a week prior, they won that fourth quarter 25-8 on the road. And it was like, okay, maybe this is them kind of getting over the hump. We know last year they were such a good fourth quarter team, and that was a lot because they had Deasia Fair, who was a terrific closer. They don't have that player now, but they're able to get good production consistently offensively through the first three quarters. They've just gone kind of tight or quiet in the fourth quarter a couple times this year.
And you brought up the name Deasia Fair, and I know that going into this year, everybody expected the team to take a step back to some degree because you can't just replace the third all-time leading scorer in college basketball history. Were you expecting this, though, this type of drop-off? And what has been the biggest issue, other than the fact she's not there to score when they need a bucket? They can't just give Deasia Fair the ball and get out of the way. What else do they miss about having her out there?
I think she was a better defender than maybe she got credit for in their matchup zone. She kind of knew where to be. And I think that's the biggest thing. You're seeing the defense come together here in Coach Jack's matchup zone. And not to just make comparisons to the men's team, but it is kind of similar in terms of teams we've seen on the men's side that are kind of learning the 2-3 zone over the course of a season. And it feels like they've gotten the defense to be better here recently because it was a young team with some new pieces and trying to figure out where they're supposed to be in that defense. And now it's just kind of getting the offense over the hump in the fourth quarter and making sure that they have a clutch bucket here or there when they need it, because they're playing a really tough schedule in the ACC. And I do think their record 8-13 right now, it's misleading from a standpoint of they've unfortunately played some of their best games of the year against teams that they were very unlikely to beat, or they played up in competition. So you think about how they played at Louisville in a game that they really could have won, at Florida State. They played well against Maryland early on in the year. And then when they go against teams like SMU, which is a game they should have won at home, they didn't have Kyra Wood for that game, and similar story, just didn't make enough plays down the stretch. This game against Virginia didn't make enough plays down the stretch. So they've dealt with injuries too, but every team's kind of dealing with that. And it's just last year it felt like the ball always bounced their way. They always won the close games. And for whatever reason, this year has felt like the opposite, honestly. I don't think it's as big of a difference in the team as maybe the record indicates, but they're just not getting breaks to go their way.
Interesting. And now they find themselves again dangerously close to the bottom half of the conference and whether or not they'll make the ACC tournament. Syracuse at 2-8 in conference play. SMU's 2-9. Pitt 1-9. Wake 1-10. How concerned are you? How concerned should SU fans be about the ACC tournament?
Yeah, pretty concerned. I think Wake Forest at home on Sunday is virtually a must-win game, in my opinion, to feel good about your chances of making the ACC tournament. They go to Virginia Tech Thursday night. Hokies are not what they have been in previous years. Kenny Brooks is now coaching at Kentucky. Georgia Amore, by the way, had 43 points at Kentucky yesterday in their win over Oklahoma. But Virginia Tech's still pretty good. They're 5-5, I think, or 6-5 now in conference play because they won yesterday. So they've kind of taken care of business against teams like Syracuse or teams below them in the standings. It's always a tough place to play. They still draw great crowds there. So that's going to be a tough game. It's winnable. Like if they play the way we know Syracuse can play, they can be right in that game down the stretch. I wouldn't doubt that. But, Wake Forest is really one you're circling as a true must-win because they're behind you in the standings, and that's the only time you play them. You can't lose the tiebreaker or lose that game, really, and feel good about your chances of making it to Greensboro.
All right, let's move on to the men's lacrosse team. And, high expectations certainly coming in, ranked number 2 in the country. We thought they were better than Jacksonville. The way in which they went out and just dominated from start to finish, though, what do you take away from that performance, Tim?
The most impressive thing to me was the defense. I knew that they were going to score, honestly. I mean, this team's going to score goals. We know what they have offensively. We know what they bring back. I think the biggest question mark overall with the team is the short stick defensive midfield position, which has been a little bit of a question mark in recent years. Carter Rice is one of the best in the country, but what do they have behind him? And Jacksonville returned a good chunk of their offense from last year, which was a top 10 scoring offense in the country. They play a softer schedule than a Syracuse or some other teams in the nation, of course, but they still really held them in check in 6-on-6 situations. I don't think they scored maybe one goal late in 6-on-6. Other than that, it was a couple transition goals, only 4 goals total in the game from Jacksonville. I think Michael Grace, who is now at Close Defense, a transfer in from RIT, he's All-American good, I would say, based on what I've seen in practice and then the first game. So they have a good core there defensively, but from what I heard, I wasn't at the scrimmage against BU, but from what I heard, they struggled a little bit sliding and struggled a little bit on the defensive end, and the offense was ahead of the defense. So I was expecting the win over Jacksonville to be something like 20-9 or 20-10 maybe. And to go 25 goals is one thing, but to hold Jacksonville to 4 goals, which was even more impressive, I think.
All right, so that question was answered to some degree for you. Any other questions that you have about this team? I know it's super early, but as they get ready for Vermont, they've got these 2 games in the span of essentially 48 hours, 72 hours. They got Vermont on Friday night, and then Towson Monday evening. What do you hope, or are there any questions you're hoping to be answered with those 2 games before they go off and play Maryland?
I think Vermont, they will win handedly. It would be my guess. I mean, they beat them 20-7 last year in the opener. Vermont will be making their season opener inside the Dome Friday night. The Towson game for sure is one that you could lose, and I don't want people to panic if they play poorly in that game. That is just a really tough assignment on a quick turnaround. You go Friday night to Monday evening, like you said, and Towson plays tomorrow night at home against Johns Hopkins, so that'll be interesting to see how they fare there. But Towson's a top 20 team. They came into the Dome last year and played Syracuse well in the NCAA tournament, first-round game. So I would definitely circle that one as just a tough game given the situation. For Syracuse, it'll be their 3rd game in 10 days. In terms of other question marks that I'd like to see answered, I think Jimmy McCool is the goalie right now, and he really wasn't tested a ton. So how will he fare once they go against Maryland, once they go against Towson, a top 20 team, and he's getting, peppered with more shots and is truly tested? That'll be interesting. The other thing with the face-off rules this year, they've changed the rules again, and John Mullen is definitely their number 1 guy at the face-off position. But now if you lose, or if you have a violation on a face-off, you can't go back to that guy who had the violation on the next face-off. So they have a group of guys that we have seen a little bit of. You go back 2 years ago, Jack Fine, Johnny Rachusa were the main face-off guys. They're in the conversation. I'm interested who's going to be that second face-off guy, because I do think they'll use John Mullen as much as they can, but naturally every team is going to have to go to a second face-off guy this year.
I mean, the fact that that is on your high list of questions right now, that's a good problem to have, right? That's a very good problem to have. Any final thoughts on men's lacrosse here before we let you go?
I just think, this offense is so much fun to watch. And I know we've said that the last couple years, but honestly, if you haven't been to a lacrosse game yet, I know it's like, okay, they beat Jacksonville. Some fans probably are thinking, let's pump the brakes. Let's see how they do against Maryland, or, they were supposed to beat Jacksonville. There was a good crowd for the opener, about 5,000 fans. It's a blast to go to any lacrosse game, in my opinion. I'm biased, but this year's team is just really fun to watch on offense, because all these guys are juniors now that we've been talking about for years from that big 2022 recruiting class. And you can tell they just have played together a lot. They know where the ball is going. They're just doing crazy behind-the-back stuff. It's really fun to watch, and it makes you think of the Gary Gate days, and I know that he envisioned this being the type of offense they would play. So I would really encourage people, like, this is a great year to go to games. The back half of the schedule is going to be a lot of top 5 games, and it does make a difference, of course, when they have a big crowd. So I just can't say enough about how much fun it is to watch this year's offense. And, I do think the ceiling is very high for this team, and I would expect them to be there on Memorial Day weekend this year.
All right. I was going to ask you that. You answered my question before I even asked. Tim Leonard here on the show. Coach Jack show tonight, right?
Yeah. Out at Wegmans, the Burger Bar in DeWitt. So 7 to 8 p.m. I'll be out there with Paulie. So if you want to join us, ask a question to Coach Jack in person, we'd be happy to do that.
Usually a good crowd, too.
Yeah, it has been a good crowd. So
All right.
a lot of fun.
Okay, we will we'll step aside here. Phone lines open the rest of the way if you want to check in. 315-437-7644. Back after this on ESPN Radio.
No, I don't stop working. You guys can all give me crap. I work. I go to work.